You will do more good to have a face-to-face conversation with 5 people at a farmer's market than you will to argue with 200 people online that you've never met. You know, the way that we change this country is get out and have face-to-face interaction.
All right. I'm Laura Forcum, president of the Independent Center and a former marketing professor.
I'm Lauren Hall, professor of political science and author of the Substack, The Radical Moderate's Guide to Life.
This is We Made This Political, a podcast about making politics more about flourishing and less about power.
We talk about living together in families, communities, and as citizens, drawing from our backgrounds in psychology and political science, and as parents. Hi, everyone. We're absolutely thrilled today to be joined by Wilkinson. Laura and I have both been on his amazing podcast, and we're really excited to have him join us so that we can turn the tables a little bit. Laura's going to do a bigger bio, and then we're going to jump right in. So go ahead, Laura.
We're so excited to have Wilk with us today. His podcast, Derate the Hate, is much in the same vein as this podcast, which is talking to people and thinking about relationships and politics and policy in a really different way. So Wilk is a bridge builder dedicated to replacing division with understanding. After years in transportation and operations management, where he learned the power of clear communication and shared purpose, he now serves as director of media systems and operations at Braver Angels, the nation's largest grassroots cross-partisan movement. He's also the host of Derate the Hate, as I mentioned, where he leads real conversations about how we can lower the temperature of politics without compromising our convictions. Whether behind a microphone or behind the scenes, Wilk is driven by a belief that better communication builds stronger communities. So thank you so much for joining us, Wilk.
It's an honor to be here with you two. Thank you so much for having me.
So do you want to just start off and kind of tell us like how you created Derate the Hate and where the name comes from and what made you decide that you should start a podcast, much like we decided to?
Yeah. So back in 2020, well, I can go back a little bit further than that. So I had been on a personal journey to kind of better my mindset and things because I had a lot of anger and animus from different things that I had experienced growing up. And so had been on this personal journey to better myself because the more I looked at all the problems in my life, the more I found that the common denominator was me. So I started looking at better ways to deal with things. And I was still kind of toxic when it came to, and I'll use that word toxic, when it came to, kind of political interactions and things like that, because online I would get into arguments like so many people do with people that I didn't know about things that I probably didn't know enough about. And I thought, okay, 2018 or 19, I came up with this idea for a t-shirt company. It was very poorly designed. It was not well thought through. It was just a way for me to waste a bunch of money and not accomplish anything positive. So I did that, and I was getting a large amount of online hate mail, let's say, and thought about doing a podcast to try and promote the shirts, thought about doing a haters happy hour to kind of call out the people that were saying all these horrible and very mean things to me. And it kind of came to me early on. I came up with the name Derate the Hate for a couple reasons, right? I saw all this online hate and toxicity in that online ecosystem that we all spend so much time in. And also in the trucking world that I had spent 20 some years in, to derate an engine, to derate a power system on a truck means to turn it down so it does not destroy itself. So if something's going wrong on a truck, it will derate. It will turn down that engine or that powertrain system. It'll turn down that entity's ability to operate at that level so that it doesn't destroy itself or do more damage. in podcasting, to derate something, or in audio engineering, to derate something is to turn it down as well. So I thought derate the hate, it just sounded right, and started talking about mindset, started talking about my journey and how the ugliness in my life I had been turning down for quite some time. Several months later, probably into either at the end of year one or the beginning of year two of my podcast, Braver Angels, comes to me through a couple local ambassadors and says, "Hey, we'd love to come talk to you about this organization." And there it started. I signed up as a member that day with the organization, started volunteering, started doing different things with them. That was 5 years ago. And here we are today. 300, probably close to 300 Derate the Hate episodes, and a lot of work in the depolarization space with my favorite organization, Braver Angels.
That 100's like quite a number, I have to say. I think
Yeah.
we're like 25 in, and we applaud 300. We're impressed. We aspire to 300.
It's it's a lot of work, but it's definitely rewarding.
Yeah.
Having the conversations, doing this thing, knowing that there's people out there that it really makes a difference for, makes it worthwhile.
Mhm. So 2 things on that. One is the podcast name story is a great example of like why you should ask curious questions. I had assumed that I knew why why your podcast was named that, and I assumed it was like thinking about like algorithms and like rating. So like how to like derate hate online, like how to, and so it did not even occur to me that there was like this very perfectly fitting like technical analogy that you were pulling from. So anyway, like very good example of why even when we are assuming positive things about people, the truth is often like cooler and more complex than we think it is. So that is little moral of today's story. One thing about podcasts that I love, and this is, you and I were chatting about this a little bit before before we went live. I think there's a lot to be like really sort of depressed about right now. There's a lot to like sort of, I think a lot of friends of mine are like sort of in despair mode. And I also see a lot of people just reflexively reacting to like news stories, right? So like, obviously like the White House is like a huge, right? The East Wing, all this kind of stuff. But one of the things that like I think has kept me feeling relatively optimistic is the fact that every week I get to talk to someone doing really incredible work like you. We've had just so many builders on this podcast, really amazing people who have given so generously of their time. I mean, your work with the podcast, with Braver Angels until very recently was largely volunteer, right? And so people are just giving of themselves to build a better world. And so to me, I am not actually that pessimistic. I feel really good about things because we get to talk to people like you. Is that what you find? I mean, do you think that your work has like changed the way that you're thinking about our current problem?
Oh, it absolutely does. And Lauren, you make such an incredible point, right? Because so many people get caught up in that small subsection of what life really is when they're, well, let's just face it. If you're spending a lot of time on social media, you're going to get more of what you spend more time looking at it. And if you get hung up in the negativity that you see online, the algorithm is going to continue to feed you more negativity.
Yep.
And it's a human condition. Our perception becomes our reality, and our perception is driven largely by what we consume for media. So if we are looking at one of the more toxic, say, media, the 24-hour news network, cable media, kind of things, that's constantly feeding us negativity about a particular person, one side or the other, because it's not exclusive to either side. Or our social media feed is filled with that constant toxicity, or the only thing that we post is toxic things about a particular candidate or whatever, we're going to get fed back that same kind of thing, right? So our perception is guided strongly by what we consume in media and social media and things like that. And that becomes our reality. The reality, though, is the real reality, not the faux reality that social media and media and the loudest politicians try to feed us constantly. But the real reality is there's far more of us out there that don't subscribe to the idea that we are completely in shambles, that we are
Yep.
falling apart at the seams. Our liberal democracy will no longer exist. Everything's an existential threat. We constantly have to be looking over our shoulder because we live in rural America, but we're made to believe that what's happening in Chicago, New York, Seattle, Portland, these things are not reality, but we fall into that trap as human beings. So there is a lot more of us out there. Just remember that the people that are spreading the toxicity in social media, in our 24-hour news cycle cable environment, or the loudest politicians, that's a very, very small subsect of what our total population is. And there is a lot more of us out there that understand that there is a lot more that unites us than divides us. Everything is not an existential threat, and we are not falling apart at the seams. We've got our problems, and those problems need to be addressed, but we are in much better shape, and we are much more unified as a country than people would have you believe. That doesn't mean we can't ignore the real problems, and toxic polarization is a real problem in this country that has to be addressed.
I think one of the things that actually drew Laura and I to each other is that our work in completely different ways was addressing exactly this reality gap. So Laura's work with the Independence Center, which, she can hopefully will connect to directly. A big sort of perception gap, right, is that like you have two choices. There's the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, right? And then Laura's work is demonstrating that there's this entire, plurality, right, of people who are in fact not convinced. And then my work tries to sort of get people to stop thinking in terms of these false binaries, right? Stop thinking that your only choice is like Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter, or that your only choice is like, these really dumb binaries that we've created that help us sort of simplify the policy world, but they also make it like completely useless because they don't actually explain like how people live. So I love I think that element of perception is so important, because what distinguishes the work that we're doing is we're not selling, like, this isn't like The Secret where if we like manifest positivity into the world, it will come true. Like our argument is like, no, it's there. It's real. You're actually stuck in the matrix, right? Like there's this whole world of like positive people doing amazing things and building communities together. And we're just trying to show it to you, right? So this isn't like some sort of like toxic optimism. It's like a real project that humans are building together.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And I've given a couple talks recently where people were like, well, we didn't even know this depolarization space existed. We thought we were the only ones that wanted this. And I'm like, well, I'm here to bring you hope, because there's a whole environment out there of people, a whole community of people who are trying to bring people together. And one thing that I started saying lately, Lauren, is no longer can the bridging space, the depolarization space, be a secret society, right? We have to make sure that people know that this is part of real reality. That it's real, that people, lots and lots of people, thousands and thousands of people, and hopefully we'll get it to be millions and millions of people, but working towards bridging people, people bringing people together to find common cause solutions to common cause problems. And, it takes a lot of courage to get into this space. It takes a lot of courage to step outside your comfort zone and say, I am going to listen with intention to people that I don't agree with. But it's so vitally important to showing all of us, every one of us, that this space is a real space and it's a needed space, because we can no longer allow the loudest voices on the outside fringes of either side of the political spectrum to speak for all people when all people don't ascribe to that kind of toxicity.
Yeah. I think, it's in the title, right? Brave for Angels. There's some bravery too in what you described when you were thinking about like how you deal with your haters, right? Which is like one choice is to kind of stay back, stay at arm's length and sort of like continue to yell on the internet. Right. And it sounds like what you decided to do was sort of like go right into it and say, like, oh, you don't like me? Well, let's talk. Let's hear more about that. Right. And I think like people have this idea that what you're talking about in bridging or polarization is being nice, but it's something really different, right? It's like it's having the courage to sort of wade into the middle of it and say, okay, like I'll listen, right? And I feel like that's what you're saying with the podcast too, is right? Like put it out there. Let's have a conversation. We don't have to agree. And so I wonder, like, how has doing the podcast kind of changed your understanding of what that listening opportunity was like, or what's called for in order to get people ready to stop yelling in the comment section?
Yeah. So, which is a great question. Is okay. What's the advantage to listening to somebody that I clearly don't have
Mhm.
anything in common with, or don't have, I'm not going to find any points of agreement with this person. And the reality is that's not true.
Mhm.
We often think that because we're made to believe that through, um, like, again, the loudest voices. But when we actually look at and actually engage with and listen with intention to those people that we're speaking with, that we think that we have nothing in common with, we find that we have a lot more in common. Uh, the points of agreement that we'll find in a lot of these conversations with people that have clearly been mischaracterized by other people, right? Again, going back to the perception as reality thing, one of the things for me that when I started engaging in these conversations with people, I'm like, I don't have any idea where this is going to go. Why this even makes sense? These people hate me. They, they don't understand me. I understand them. Blah blah blah. But when we start having the conversation, when we start talking with each other instead of talking past each other, we find that there are several points of agreement. If there is no common ground to be found on a particular topic that we're talking about, at least we can find common ground in our shared humanity, right? Our ability for compassion, our want and needs for, a place for our family to sleep, and food for our belly, and clean water to drink, clean air to breathe. Uh, you know, I love people, people love me. You love people, people love you. We have this shared humanity. If we are speaking about a particular topic that we can find no common ground on, which is actually very rare, but if we have no common ground on a particular topic, at least we have our shared humanity, which will allow us to have more conversations in the future. It allows us to have that stepping stone for when we need to start talking about our next thing, clearing up those misperceptions. And again, like I said, I'll go back to, I'll say it again and again and again, that the idea that there will be no common ground, very slim,
Mhm.
and the idea that I have to give up my strongly held convictions just to have that
Mhm.
conversation, also a misconception. I can hold on to my strongly held convictions. You can hold on to your strongly held convictions. Just because I listen to you, acknowledgement is not agreement.
Yeah.
Acknowledgement is not
Yeah.
agreement. But I have to have the courage. I have to have the courage to be able to listen, step outside my comfort zone, listen and acknowledge what is being said by the person that I have nothing to, that I think I have nothing in common with. That takes courage. That's
Mhm.
what courageous
Mhm.
citizenship is. That's what Braver Angels does, is brings people together, equips them with the tools to engage in courageous citizenship, reclaim our agency,
Mhm.
and have conversations across those divides so that we can, at some point, go back into our community and say, look, we thought we had nothing in common, but we do. We
Mhm.
thought we could get nothing done, but we did. And it's one of those things that there is obviously a lot of incentive for certain people to keep us divided,
Mhm.
but what we can get done together so far exceeds any benefit uh, to that they were going to receive by keeping us apart. So
Okay. Yeah. One one thing I've noticed in the bridging space, and this is, I think, a potential weakness, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, I work in a lot of I attend a lot of bridging, events and things like that. And one thing that we often admit is like we are often to a certain degree singing to the choir, right? Like we are not always the people who need to hear the messages that we are. And I think that there's an enormous amount of like benefit to practicing these skills. I know my ability to not get reactive, not get defensive has gotten much better. Like, so I mean, I'm just like a better person for occupying bridging spaces. But I'm wondering if you see I mean, like a couple of criticisms I've seen are like that there can be an element of sort of preaching to the choir, but then also I've heard, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, whether it's accurate. I've also heard that it can be really hard to get conservatives into these spaces because they feel as though they're going to get attacked, right? They don't feel maybe that it's quite a safe space for open dialogue. So, first of all, does Bravery Angels see that kind of challenge? And if so, how are you all thinking about that?
yes, we absolutely see it. It's definitely a recognized challenge, but
Mhm.
there's no doubt about that. Both things, right? We often are perceived as having uh, just conversation, speaking to the choir.
Yeah.
Um, it's a bunch of people in the bridging space talking about the bridging space with other people in the bridging space. And then there's a whole bunch of other people out there that don't even know that the bridging space exists. So yeah, that is a recognized issue. And then the conservative, uh, not not engaging in the bridging space. And I think you nailed it, Lauren, when you said, they feel that they're just going to be attacked and there's not going to be anything positive that comes from it. So why bother, right?
Yeah.
And which is definitely a problem, and it's a problem that we have to overcome because, well, I just came from a conference last week that was largely several hundred very conservative, very patriotic people, and had more than 200 conversations face to face, shake hands, have conversations about people, and there was very few that even knew we existed, and every single one of them says we need so much more of this. I didn't know you existed. We need so much more of this, which to me tells me, again, going back to my earlier point of the bridging space can no longer be the secret society, right?
Mhm.
We have to start swimming in pools that we would not normally swim in. The bridging space, again, the bridging movement, I think understands that. And it's been largely, I don't want to say largely ignored, but largely unexplored, as a way to do things. But that's part of my job.
Mhm.
I may be one of these kind of unicorns in the space, right? Where I'm a very conservative guy. I'm a blue collar conservative Christian man that uh, just likes to talk to people. I love to network. I love to get out there and I love to talk to people. And I think that there's far too many people in the bridging space that come at it from a very intellectual
Mhm.
kind
Mhm.
of angle. And then it turns into a lot of talking that doesn't translate into a lot of action. We are changing that at Brave Angels. Again, we're talking about, with our new CEO Mari Giles, who's recently come on. Uh, we are we are following a new North Star, and that's courageous citizenship. And what that
Mhm.
translates to is a lot of action, not just a lot of talk, which talk is very important. Dialogue
Mhm.
across divisions is hugely important, but that's just one part of this, right? We have to start, especially to bring in conservatives, because when I think about conservatism and when I think about the conservatives that I know and the conservative that I am, I want to know that I will see tangible results for the work that I'm putting in. So dialogue is one piece of that because that's a very important first step, having dialogues across divides. But what does that translate to when it comes to action?
Mhm.
That's where we reclaim our agency by having conversations across divides and show people that we are not helpless when it comes to, or we are not powerless when it comes to affecting change. Not every issue has to be a federal issue. So when we start to have these conversations with our neighbors and our community groups and our local school boards and things like that, we need to take those conversations and translate that into action within our communities to show people, again, I am not powerless to affect change. Once we start to build that civic muscle and engage within our community again, instead of just pretending like everything that's happening online is happening in my backyard, we turn that civic engagement, that courageous citizenship, into local action to to solve common cause problems. And then we take it, further. We take it from our community to our state, to our region, our federal government. Then we start to affect change as we, the people. That's where we find real tangible action. That's where we get conservatives into this space. But you're absolutely right. We cannot just spend all of our time preaching to the choir and expect it to produce any tangible results that any of us are going to be happy with.
Yeah. Laura and I were actually just texting the other day about the sort of like the hyper intellectualism that like that people can fall into. I mean, especially academics. I mean, that's guilty.
Yeah.
It's a silo, right? And so it's hard. Where I know Laura has a couple follow-up questions too, but where should people find? I mean, I know like in my community, in part because we've done a really good job sorting ourselves, right? So like blue collar communities are different than white collar communities, right? Like people now work in different places where they don't share, I mean, it's just like, we've actually done like a really good job of like saying like, we're not gonna spend a lot of time with people who have different beliefs than us. So how do you see, I mean, other than than specific bridging spaces, where do you see the most areas for like progressives and libertarians and conservatives to like bump into each other to actually have these productive conversations? Are there specific spaces that you think this is happening, that it's particularly hopeful, or do you have to create those spaces?
Well, I think it's a both and kind of thing, right? I mean, there's spaces where people are still civically engaged in very big ways. I mean, you look at your VFW, your American Legion, your local Lions Club, different things like that. You have farmers markets all over rural America all the time. Hardworking Americans that are bringing together their fruits, their vegetables, their homemade bread, and things like that. There's ways that we can civically engage with people that are not like us. But if we spend all of our time in our own cul-de-sac or online, that's just not going to get the job done. You will do more good to have a face-to-face conversation with 5 people at a farmer's market than you will to argue with 200 people online that you've never met. The way that we change this country is get out and have face-to-face interaction, which was one of the largest, disparate impacts that we saw from the government's response to the pandemic was, people's inability to actually get out and engage with one another. Many people were led to believe that engaging with somebody online is the same as engaging with people in real life, and it's just not. So, while I'm not going to completely knock the Zoom era, because that's, obviously how I do a lot of my work, but the reality is, again, we need to get out and have, go to county fairs and local bake sales and farmers markets and bike runs. I mean, I live in the state of Minnesota, and all the way up until there's 6 inches of snow on the ground, there's probably a bike run somewhere going on. That's a lot of patriotic Americans doing very patriotic things to raise money for people that need it. So there's just a lot of good people out there doing amazing things. But if we spend all of our time stuck inside and not actually getting out and experiencing what the world has to offer, we forget that those things are happening. So civic engagement does require courageous citizenship. Especially if you think about the book iGen for Janie Twenge, the next generation has less personal contact with people than any generation but before them. One of the things that's come up quite often in church that I've heard and other conversations that I've had is we live in the most connected era than any time in human history, but people are lonelier than they've ever been. It's because the faux connection that we find online is very different than the true interpersonal connection of getting out, shaking people's hands and speaking with them eye to eye. So it's really about, stepping outside of your comfort zone. Again, courageous citizenship. Step outside your comfort zone, go to a place that you've never been, have a conversation with somebody that you don't know, and don't start it and don't begin that conversation with, I'm a conservative. What do you do?
Yeah.
Or I'm a liberal and I'm looking for a conservative to have a conversation with. That is not the way that it works, which is another beautiful thing about Braver Angels, providing people with that true infrastructure, that right kind of framework to have those conversations. But I mean, that's not going to be for everybody. But I tell you what, when you start getting out there and having conversations with people in real life, getting to know them. I mean, I remember, I'm probably a little older than both of you, but I can remember a time when not every conversation had to do with politics. I mean, growing up, I had no idea what my friends believed politically, even into my early, late, all through my 20s, into my mid 30s. I had no idea what people believed politically. I didn't even know what a Republican and conservative was until I was in, probably my late 20s. It was just a thing. We didn't have to make everything political. Now I love you guys' show. It's political, but
with the joke.
The reality is not everything. Not every conversation has to be a political conversation. Not every conversation has to be had. Not every topic has to be discussed with every single person. Know your audience, figure it out. That's what we used to do before.
There's that's something that we talk about on this podcast, and I talk about it a lot because my background is in social psychology, right? And what we know is that people evolved for face-to-face interaction. So I think it's, on one hand, I think we should acknowledge that, like, it feels discomfortable. It feels uncomfortable, right? It feels like it takes bravery to go talk to other people. But on the other hand, that feeling doesn't actually line up with reality if you'll go do it, because you have all of these cognitive capabilities that don't require your conscious awareness or direction, right? Like, they just are part of your mental makeup. Where you can actually go talk to somebody face to face across great divides of disagreement. And you guys can manage that process in a way that doesn't create conflict and argument. And you really don't even have to try. So it's sort of like, it feels harder at the outset than it is if you'll actually just do it. And once you have that one successful conversation, you can do more. Right. But like, you just need to push through that initial resistance, because if you go try it, what's really incredible is that tone and body language and the timing of how you talk and eye contact, like all these things smooth discomfort. And we've gotten used to trying to communicate online through screens, but that's a lot harder, which is why it's so much more conflictual. Like, you can absolutely do this. So I feel like there needs to be some sort of like balance of, like, the bravery is at the starting point. The courageousness is like making the choice to go do it, but it's really not going to be as hard as you think once you kind of take the plunge.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, the anxiety is a very real thing that a lot of people suffer from, right? But anxiety is the fear of the unknown, the fear of the what if. And when we force ourselves to push through the anxiety of, well, this person hates me, why would I have that conversation? when we push through that anxiety, that fear of the unknown, and actually have the conversation, excuse me, um, it, 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 it is just like any other muscle, right? We do it more, it becomes easier, it becomes easier, it becomes easier. And that anxiety becomes less and less and less prevalent in our ability to have those conversations. It's just like, when it comes to anything else, like public speaking, right? Public speaking is one of the greatest fears that humans have ever thought about. But if you do it once and then do it again and then do it again, after a while, for not all people, there's certain people I know that are still the public speakers, speak for a living, and they are scared, silly each time they got to get on stage. But the reality is as we do it more, as we have more of these conversations, and more than that, we start to clear up those misconceptions, those misperceptions about those on the other side, right? Monica Guzman from Braver Angels said it better than anybody when she said, those who are underrepresented in our life will be overrepresented in our minds and our imaginations. If we silo ourselves and siloing and othering is a huge problem, right? If we silo ourselves from those other people, we start to make up in our mind who they are, how bad they are. They become they no longer are just wrong. They are evil or they are dumb. And we imagine the worst about them. I recently, there's been a number of studies out, right? But people on the Republican side of the political spectrum and people on the liberal side of the political spectrum believe that upwards of 40 to 50% of the other side, they believe that many people on the other side would justify violence to achieve their political means. But the reality is that number is much, much smaller.
Right.
Right. I mean, while I still think that number is far too large, and you could look at the numbers and interpret them different ways, but it's probably closer to like 10% on either side.
Right.
10 to 12%, which is still far too much. But you take, the 12% from either, you still got 80% of the American people that don't have, that think that political violence is absolutely, horrible and would never find any way to justify it. But you still have people out there that are saying, well, we can no longer coexist with this, this subset of people because they believe in political violence. Well, no group is a monolith. We cannot pretend to say that all the left believes that political violence is justified, or all the right believes that political violence is justified. There is no all of anything. And the more that we silo ourselves and other them, find ourselves siloing and othering and working towards an us versus them kind of framework, we lose sight of who people are. We lose sight of their humanity. We lose sight of what they actually believe, who they actually are as human beings. And it just makes everything worse. So I take that back to, work through your anxiety. Work through your anxiety. Have the courage to stand up and say, I am going to have conversation with this person. Abraham Lincoln was awesome. He says, I hate that man. I need to get to know him better. Or I do not like that man. I must get to know him better. And the reality is no matter how you slice it, we cannot hate others into believing what we believe. We can't. We cannot hate or berate people into believing what we believe. The only way we can do any kind of adjustment is in the way that we think is through dialogue with people that we disagree with. And hopefully they have a mind that's open enough and a heart that's open enough that if we're right, we move to their side. If they're right, we move to their side. And we are able to work through our common cause problems together, because we're not going to work through our common cause problems by hating each other.
So your this whole conversation had me reminded of So first of all, I'll say that like I often fall into the trap of overemphasizing, you know, the need for like deep conversations across differences, right? You know, like get people into a room and, you know, do pluralist lab stuff and all, which is amazing, right? Like those are amazing things. But your point I think is really crucial, which is that's not where most Americans live. That's not where most Americans are going to find each other. And one of the most powerful experiences of my life was waitressing in grad school. And I was waitressing in
Yeah.
this small rural town at a family, you know, small family restaurant. Uh, and and what it did was a couple of things that I think are really crucial. First of all, I had to get along with people at the front of the house and the back of the house, right? The front of the house was, you know, rural white Americans. The back of the house was four undocumented Mexican brothers and a single mom who's doing incredible work. She didn't graduate high school. She had two kids, was just working her butt off to make sure that her kids had a good life. A couple other like undergrads and then, you know, some other folks. But anyway, there was like just a huge diversity within this restaurant, you know? But a couple of things that I think you've pointed to are really crucial. One, politics didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that we had this common project, which is let's get these people their food in a reasonable amount of time when it's still warm and make sure that they pay for it, right? Like that's
Right.
our common project. And what I found is that like, you know, politics didn't matter. I could kind of guess, you know, you can sort of guess people's politics. And this is before people like wore t-shirts and hats and stuff like that. So a lot of it really was more tacit at that point. But you know, one of the things that I think I got so irritated when social media started blowing up and you started seeing people politicize, like, you know, not tipping a waitress because you don't believe in her, you know, because her politics don't align with yours, or shaming somebody, you know, shaming a guest because they're wearing the wrong kind of hat or whatever. It's like, that's insane. Like, these are the kinds of spaces where we are politicizing non-political spaces, which means that we are not able to make the kinds of connections that we could with other people. And one of the things that I was surprised about as a waitress was that there is no pattern in terms of who's a good tipper and who's not a good tipper. Like there's no pattern in who's going to be nice and have a good conversation with you and who's going to be kind of rude. Like people vary dramatically, like across political, racial, ethnic, like rural, urban, you know, like there's a really wide variety of things that you find. So I think getting back to your farmer's market example, like we often downplay transactional kinds of interactions because it seems like it's not sort of these like rich, like you're not going to church with these people. But one of the things that the farmer's market example really should, I think we need to like take off our blinders for a second, right? It's an incredible space in which strangers are having peaceful interactions with each other that where their political, their religious differences don't matter. And like in the history of like human experience that has been so full of civil wars and all sorts of horrible things that we've done to each other in the name of political and religious and other differences, it's incredible that I can show up to a farmer's market and have a nice conversation about peppers with someone who probably, or maybe not, believes totally different things than I do. And we do it peacefully because we're focused on this common project instead of focused on all of these things that might divide us. And Carol, by the way, put in the chat, she said that your comment about the local farmers market should be a 250th anniversary billboard. Like we need that. I like that. And as we celebrate the 250th. But I think we do underrate those small interactions with each other, and we kind of mistake what's happening there. And some of it's because they're so banal. We do them every day, so we kind of don't see them for what they are, but they're really powerful.
No, you're absolutely right. The power of personal interaction with people that we don't know, that is so incredibly important. I go back to when I first got out of the service, you know, almost 30 years ago now, or 20 some years ago now. I drove cab in the city of Orlando, and the city of Orlando is very unique in the sense that it's the tourist capital of the world, and you have people every single day from all over the world coming to that one location and going all over the city to do different things. And driving cab there gave me an insight into so many different cultures and so many different people. And, you know, to your point about There's no consistency in who tips well and who doesn't, and who's, maybe not the nicest and who is, and different things like that. I mean, you get a snapshot of so many different things as a cab driver, especially in
I
Orlando.
can imagine.
And it definitely highlighted for me something that I'd never, because, well, only a handful of years before that, I was just a Midwest kid that, didn't know anything. I mean, very little interaction with anything outside of just white rural America, right? And then joining the service, and then driving cab in the city of Orlando and interacting with people from all over the planet on any given day. It was a interesting insight into the human condition, right? Being able to experience all those kinds of different things. But one thing that it taught me, and probably the most important thing that it taught me, is never just assume anything about anybody,
Mhm.
because people will always surprise you.
Mhm.
And there is no all of anything. It's a point that I made earlier. It's a point that I constantly make. No single group is a monolith.
Mhm.
And we just cannot pretend that just because this person is from this area, they are exactly like everybody else from that area, or this person has this immutable characteristic, so they are going to be exactly like everybody else with that particular immutable characteristic. There is no all of everything. And we need to treat people, like the individual, unique human beings that they are, and really listen with intention when we're having conversations with them, and really try to understand why they believe not what they believe, not just what they believe. When we start to focus more on why a person believes what they believe, what their personal lived experience is, and how they've come to believe what they believe, it changes the landscape of everything. So, and again, a lot of that has to be done with personal interaction, and a lot of it,
Mhm.
because those are lessons. Not everybody's going to go out and be a cab driver, right?
Mhm.
Or not everybody's going to go out and be a waitress at a cafeteria or whatever. That's not going to be everybody's lived experience. But you guys you may have heard me say that I spent more time, and this kind of goes back to the intellectual thing. I spent more time on bar stools than I did in classrooms. But that's just been my lived experience, right? But one of the greatest things I've learned from that is that, again, tying right back into the cab driving thing, everybody is different.
Mhm.
Everybody's got a different lived experience. Not everything that I experience is going to land the same way. Even if we experience the exact same thing, it lands differently for all people, and we have to remember that in our conversations, because if we don't, we lose sight of, again, who this person is, why they believe what they believe, and how we can, um, how we can better coexist in this world that we all share, because we've got one rock to live on, and this is it, and we have to coexist with each other.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's so well said. Um, I'm curious. One of the things that we ask a lot on this podcast is how people's work or professional experience colors their parenting experience and vice versa. And Lauren and I kind of talk about this intermixing between personal and professional understandings, right? And so I'm curious, like as you're parenting, how does your viewpoint on approaching other people and being curious about other people, does that register in your parenting, or like do you think it's inherited? Do you have more than one child, or do I?
Yeah, I've got a 17-year-old. Well, he's going to be 17 next week, but 17-year-old stepson, and a daughter that's just about 6 years old. So
Is so, is it inherited, your, like, your curiosity and your conversation approach, or, tell us more about that?
I wouldn't say it's inherited. I mean, again, this is that civic muscle is something that we have to work out constantly. Now my daughter is very curious about all kinds of things. She's incredibly smart and she wants to know everything. Well, she thinks she knows everything,
Yeah.
but she wants to know as much about as many things as possible. And she's definitely got the gift of gab, loves to have conversations. So I think her and I are going to be very, very in tune on that one. So that might be inherited, but how we interact with people is a big thing. Um, and again, the I don't know if you want to call it like the social butterfly, and how, I've known parents that were very, very, um, very, very socially active that had very introverted kids. And I've known people that were very extroverted kids that had very introverted parents. I don't think it is necessarily inherited. I do think, like all things, we are human beings. We kind of learn and develop at our own pace to a certain extent, and have to try to figure out our own way. Um, but I growing up, I was very socially awkward, and was bullied a lot, and had a lot of insecurities and things like that I had to work through, and I did it my own way, and most of the lessons that I learned to get out of that pattern was doing things the wrong way. Um, but uh, but in my parenting style, I try to, and now in my, my personal coaching style, when I'm having conversations with people, I try to bring that to them so they don't experience the same pain and trauma that I experienced to get to where I'm at. So if I can, pass along to my children a a a stronger sense of how to do things right as opposed to the painful and wrong way, that's what I'll do. But it's not always a guarantee.
Okay. Well, we have one reader question, and then Laura had a really great question about your background in logistics that I want to make sure she has a chance to answer, because I'm super curious to hear that. James had a question in the chat, which was, do you think either political party actually wants this kind of sort of civic courage, citizen courage? Or do you think the incentive structure of sort of politics is kind of broken? So that's one question.
I
I
think
don't know.
the incentive structure of our political system, and I think the incentive structure in our media is broken.
Yeah.
So, do I believe that the parties themselves or the political apparatus itself wants courageous citizenship and wants to bring people together? Just like anything, I think there's people within that system that want it. I think, unfortunately, the incentive structure within those systems prevent it. And I think we need to figure that out as we the people, because that is one of those things that if the incentive structure continues to work against what's going to be best for us as citizens, we have to have a hard conversation about how we fix that. Because it is, that is obviously one of the greatest threats to our nation. I get so sick and tired of people constantly calling everything an existential threat, but that's going to be the biggest threat to our political system as it is that the incentive structure for politicians and media organizations is to keep people scared, mad, and aggrieved. And there's got to be something to be done about it. But that's why. And then, I'll go back to something I said quite often during the pandemic. I said it in conversations with a number of different, public health professionals is you can't make mandates make better arguments. So we in the bridging space, we in the political depolarization space have to present a more compelling argument for the reasons that we do it, or the reasons that we need to be together and kind of overcome that incentive structure that's in our politics and in our media that keep us all scared, mad, and aggrieved. Yeah, fear, outrage, and grievance is one of the ugliest models, but it's the model that seems to pay the best. So
So
Yeah.
true. Yeah. Um, so I guess our last question before we let you go is you touched on this briefly, and it's in your bio that your background was in, cab driving and logistics and truck driving. And so I'm just wondering, like, sometimes when we're looking backwards, that's when we're like, oh, this is not a random path. Like there's a through line here. There's something that ties all of this together. And so I'm wondering like how that looks to you from your vantage point now.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely a through line, Laura. When I think about how my uh, how my life and how I interacted with people all along my career in business and operations changed over the years, and really beginning to understand human beings and how I went from being a leader that made or tried to make people do what I wanted them to do, and I
Mm.
became a leader that was a leader that people wanted to do stuff for.
Mhm.
And the leadership style and the way that that leadership style evolved over the years, and this is not exclusive to trucking and transportation or anything else, but when you start to show people and make people feel heard and valued as human beings, they are much more likely to do what you need them to do, um, open their mind to the possibility that they could be wrong and your way is better, things like that. So the through line is really this. As we interact with human beings, whether you're in a leadership role or not, or you're just a parent, or you're
Mhm.
a community leader or a politician or things like that, if we provide an environment for people to succeed, provide them with the infrastructure and the tools needed to succeed and get what they want in life, but also combine that with the idea that if we are listening to them and show them that they are truly valued, we're not just a person that's out there checking boxes and providing, this facade that we're listening. We are actually listening with intention to the person that we're speaking with and making them feel so valued, making sure that they feel like that you're the only person they're talking to right at that time. It's amazing how much more that we can get done as human beings. So when I incorporated that into my leadership style and started doing things, I mean, and it wasn't like an overnight thing. It was like literally a long learning process, like most things in my life. I figured out the hard way, and I take the longest time possible to get it right. But the reality is that is such an important part of leadership and being a human being. And whether you're doing depolarization work, or you're doing politics, or you're doing operations management, or you're just trying to be a better friend or husband or wife or father or community member, when you start to listen with intention and make people feel valued, the things that you can get done together are uh, the, the possibilities are endless. So the through line there is, again, we're human beings, and we value each other, and we show each other that we value each other, and we can get things done. If we continue to fight and silo ourselves and divide ourselves, we're not going to get a lot done. And so, I mean, people got a choice to make. And do they want to be courageous citizens and value their neighbors, or do they want to continue to remain divided and yelling at each other? And so, hopefully, that answered your question. But
Yeah. And that ties directly into something we've been talking about since the beginning of this podcast, which is you can have control or you can have relationships, but you can't have them both together. Right. And so we think about that in our parenting, and we also think about it in politics, right? Which is like, how do you have people feel heard and agentic, right? And really hear them and have them directing their lives, which is what we should want for citizens and what we want for our kids too.
Mhm.
So we are in violent agreement with you.
Yeah.
nice, nice. Violent agreement is always good.
Yeah.
It's much
Violent,
better than violent disagreement.
violent, non-toxic agreement, right?
Yeah. There you go.
So, Wilk, the last thing we always ask all of our guests, what are you optimistic about this week? What are you feeling really positive about right now? either in the world or in your own space?
Well, I see myself as a small piece of a much bigger puzzle. And when I think about that puzzle, I know that it's not as ugly as many would have you believe. We're not nearly as divided as many would have you believe. So I'm hopeful. And again, I'll go back to something I said earlier in the conversation that the depolarization space, the bridging space, can no longer be a secret society. But for those of you out there that are feeling alone and feeling like, hey, there's nobody out there that is really doing anything to bring us together, that's not true. There's a lot of people, like thousands and thousands, and we want millions. So I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful that the majority of us actually want to work together and hold to our convictions, but engage in a better way. And I'm hopeful, and I know that we can do it. And I would just say that it just takes stepping outside of your comfort zone once in a while, being a courageous citizen, and bringing your voice to the table, because we all have a voice, we all have a story, and those stories need to be heard. So let's do it.
Awesome. Thank you. So where can people find you?
People can find me and a lot of the work that I do at deratethehate.com. So that's derate, not berate, derate, DERATE, thehate.com. Or you can just Google Wilk Wilkinson, you'll find it. And, but more than that, become a part of the movement, to bridge, cross-partisan divides. And that's braverangels.org. So if you go to braverangels.org, you can become part of a very important, very great organization. And we'll see you on the other side.
Awesome. Thank you for being with us today, Wilk. Thank you so much for your work with Braver Angels and your work with the podcast. We will talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful for you. Thank you, Lauren.
You've been listening to We Made This Political with Laura Forcum and Lauren Hall. You can find us on Substack, Instagram, or LinkedIn. The podcast Substack is We Made This Political. Laura's Substack is How to Human, and Lauren's Substack is The Radical Moderate's Guide to Life. Subscribe and share if you like what you hear, and please also rate and review on your favorite podcast platform. That really, really helps other people find our work and means a lot to us too. Thanks for listening.